Saturday as we cap a very interesting day with a session that personally I was looking forward to. There have been a lot of questions by you investors around the taxation issues, the procedures involved when you have invested in a startup, the kind of declaration that you have to make in our IT return and all. And we, with our limited expertise of the subject, have tried to address that. But this session was long overdue in terms of having a proper guidance from a professional and expert who can help us understand the various taxation aspects involved with our investment and obviously the gains of it, right? So here we are today. Maulik Doshi, Senior Executive Director, Next Time SKP, helping us through the nuances of taxation and simplifying the way. And trust me, having known Maulik for 25 years, this is going to be a very interesting session. Before I jump on to introducing Maulik, let me spend a quick couple of minutes to introduce IPV for the benefit of some of the new names that I see on the call right now. Started with a modest beginning in 2019. A group of us CXOs came together, driving it as a passion project, thinking to do something good for the startup ecosystem for the country. Today, we have come a long way and stand as one of the top 2 investors, has been acknowledged by a lot of publications and digital media, in current year itself. A 3,800 plus strong member community that keeps us going because these are investors who back us with our processes and our due diligence as well. One of the key things which makes IPV where we are today, which gets it, is our strong due diligence processes and the curation, which helps bring only the best of the startups to you. So out of 3,200 odd startups that have approached IPV for funding, only about 113 have made to the stage of due diligence where we have presented an investor call to our investors. And finally, we have invested in only 84 of them, which is almost about 2.5% success rate for the startup from approach till actually getting our check. And that speaks about the various stages of curating and due diligence that a startup has to go through before it actually gets IPV on its cap table. No wonder because of this, our success rate, where the average mortality rate for early stage investment is about 80%. For us, the success rate is about 50%, where we have already secured about 8 exit, and as many as 18 have gone on to secure follow-on rounds with at least another 5 in the pipeline. So thanks to you, this has been possible because of your support in guiding us in terms of your understanding of the sector itself. And that's what a group of CXOs can achieve if we all come together. Next. I just spoke about this. I mean, our efforts have been recognized. IPV has become a force to reckon with when it comes to early stage ecosystem, and not only as a platform, but we are being put aside VCs like Sequoia and Matrix in terms of the ranking, in terms of number of deals or capital invested, and the overall platform that we have created, ecosystem that we have created. So I have been ranked second most active VC, have been ranked third best investor by even reputed platforms and mediums like Your Story and Praxis. This only speaks about, the support and love that you have showered on us. We will continue to kind of improve in our efforts to improvise our processes every now and then. We've just introduced AIF as well, which has again made life simple for a lot of investors, and also to bring you the best quality startups so that the journey will continue. It's ongoing, and we will make sure that we remain right up there. Next. A quick minute I'd like to spend on this initiative, which we have been following for a good 1 year now, and it has yielded amazing results with some of the best marquee institutions and colleges like IITs and IIMs and ISB, XLRI, SRCCs of the world, of India rather, have been part of IPV community, where we are associated with them in 2 ways. Not only the alumni of these institutions actually get opportunity to look at our startup and invest in them with the help of our processes, but also the founders that we funnel from these communities, we are helping them with funding in our mentoring support like we do with other startups. So it's a mutually beneficial partnership. A lot of community members, as many as 1,800 plus members, have benefited from this initiative, and I encourage you, if you are already part of these communities, to join the group, or if you want us to partner with your own community, your own alma mater, feel free to reach out to us, and we'll be more than glad to onboard you as part of this initiative. Cool. So here's the man of the day, the man of the hour, my dear friend Maulik Dashi, somebody whom I have personally known as a friend for 25 years and have worked with him as a professional also. Nobody better than him when it comes to the subject of tax. He's been awarded time and again as as one of the topmost expert in taxation in India and even abroad as well. He's worked extensively with SKP Sudhir K. Parakh and Company, which is now rebranded as Nextdime. So senior executive director, Nextdime, somebody with deep understanding of tax with specialization around direct transfer pricing and transaction advisory services. So 19 plus years of experience in cross-border tax specialization over there. He heads the transfer pricing and transaction advisory services practice as at Nextdime. He's advisor to multinational companies about Indian and foreign transfer pricing rules in all contexts, including planning, litigation, APAs as part of his core practice. And his extensive transfer pricing experience includes cost sharing arrangement, transfer of tangible and intangible property, and a lot of other specific arrangements under the transfer pricing and international law. Not to forget, the domestic tax part also is part of his practice, and he's been driving it efficiently for last as many years as his overall experience in the tax field. So active participant in and transfer pricing in India and overseas. Also has been an avid writer in leading tax journals and portals. I'm sure a lot of us CXOs would know Maulik and would know Nextdime. So here we are, handing over to the platform to Maulik. Maulik, over to you. We'll have about 30 minutes for you to present, and then I'll moderate the question answer for you. But excited to look forward to this presentation by you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Mitesh. Thanks to IPU for this platform in terms of presenting the ideas on the taxation for investor community. I think most of the time we speak about how taxation works for larger corporates, etc. It's about the time that even individual investments, tax aspects are being addressed and kind of a clarity is being provided there. Over the years, I think the tax law has kind of significantly changed, both from a taxation perspective as well as from a disclosure, compliance, documentation perspective. So I think it's good that we are having this session where a larger investor community will be able to understand what this is. And that's my attempt in the next 30 minutes in a very quick presentation to provide what are the platforms available for investors as an individual and how does the taxation work on that. I've shared my screen. I hope the screen is visible, and I would then start with my presentation. Right. So what we are broadly going to cover today is mainly on the startup initiatives, what are the modes of investments that are available by the investor community, what are the platforms that are there, and how does the taxability vary across platform and across the different instruments of investments. We'll cover the aspects with respect to non-resident investments, as well as Indians who want to now make investments abroad in terms of overseas investments. And we'll also cover, are there any tax benefits being available as an investor if I invest in startups? And then we can go into the question answer session where whatever kind of questions are not answered during the presentation, we can take up those questions. So basically, if you look at the platforms for investments, the most direct platform for investment is a direct investment by an individual into a company. He would subscribe to shares, be it equity shares, preference shares, debentures, whatever is available, directly through the individual. So the most direct form, most flexible form of investment obviously is a direct investment by an individual. Then there are possibilities of kind of making investments through my own partnership firms or through my limited liability partnership. If I have a private limited company which is either engaged in an NBFC business, or if it's in any other business, I can use that private limited company as a vehicle to make an investment into a startup. From a succession planning perspective, people create a lot of trust these days. So private trust could also be one of the platform for investment where you can invest in a startup through a private trust. And then, like Mitesh mentioned earlier, IPV itself has kind of set up an AIF. So investments can be made in the AIF, which in turn will invest in the startup. Or there is a possibility to form a LLP, which is a special purpose vehicle, which is formed by a group of people or group of investors, and that LLP would make investment into startup. Now, what are the challenges? What are the pros and cons of each of the modes? What are the taxability is what we are going to cover in the subsequent slides. In terms of different classes, the primarily class that is kind of by and large we seen in the startup space is the convertible preference shares or convertible debentures or a direct equity share, depending on the stage at which the investments is being made. Generally, debt or non-convertible debentures, etc., are not seen in this kind of thing because obviously startups really are keen to kind of avoid any other interest expenditure which generally comes with a non-convertible debenture. So most of the instruments would be either convertible preference shares, convertible debentures, or direct equity shares. And obviously the choice of investor entity, the platform for investment or the instrument would depend on a host of factors, including what is the investment objective, the tax and the regulatory aspects, and the commercial understanding with the startup investee company. So major kind of factor that comes in the startup investment is the capital gains, right? That's the most common sort of income that one would expect by making an investment in startup. You don't expect dividends, you don't expect interest to come out of startup investments. So major is the capital gains, and that is what I want to start kind of address that as a core part of this presentation. So basically, the capital gains regime in India over the years has now simplified. For unlisted shares, for kind of private shares of privately held company, the capital gains would be taxable depending on whether it is a short-term gain or a long-term gain. If the period of holding is less than 24 months, then the unlisted shares or kind of private companies shares are regarded as short-term capital asset, and therefore they would be taxed as per short-term capital gains tax rates. If the period of holding is more than 24%, more than 24 months, then it is a long-term capital asset and the tax rates would be varying accordingly. So the tax rates by and large for unlisted shares or shares of private limited company, for short-term, it is your normal tax rate. As an individual, you will fall in a particular slab. Depending on that slab, it's a normal income and would be taxed at the slab rate itself. If a corporate is investing, or LLP is investing, or a partnership firm is investing, then it is the tax rate that is applicable to that partnership firm, which is generally 30% plus. So partnership firm, LLP, or corporate tax rate would be again short-term at the applicable tax rates only. For long-term capital asset, which is like I mentioned, for unlisted shares more than 24 months, the tax rate is 20% with indexation. So you get an indexation benefit in terms of the cost adjusted for inflation, which is a factor that government prescribes every year. So 20% rate with indexation. For non-resident, there is a special regime which is which as an optional to the non-resident. There is a rate of 10% available, but the non-resident does not get any benefit of indexation. So the non-resident can opt to check whether his tax based on 10% without indexation works out to be higher or lower than the 20%, and accordingly choose the regime which he wants to opt for. For listed shares and debentures, the 24-month period comes down to 12-month period. So once you hold for more than 12 months, it is a long-term asset. And in case of a listed shares or debenture, the tax rate is 10% plus the applicable surcharge, cess, etc. that is there. And obviously there is an exemption available up to 1 lakh of rupees, and there is a grandfathering benefit available with respect to listed securities, where the cost of kind of acquisition would be based on either the actual cost or the listed price as on 31st January 2018 was the day when the finance minister introduced this long-term capital gains on listed securities. And for short-term listed securities, which is less than 12 months, it is the rate of 15% plus applicable surcharge and cess. Just comparing it with the other assets, which is immobile property, again there is a period of 2 years now, and with any other asset which is not covered above the period, there is a period of 3 years for short-term or long-term. So we'll not get into the specifics of other because we are mainly concerned with shares. One important aspect that needs to be considered is that conversion of preference shares or debentures into equity shares. So the conversion event is a tax neutral event. You don't have to pay any tax at that point in time. You pay tax only when you transfer your entire shareholding or transfer your shares or kind of do an exit. So conversion of CCPS or CCDS into equity shares is actually a tax neutral event. There is no tax payable on that. These are the taxes with respect to resident Indians. For non-residents, for NRIs, the same tax rate would apply, except that in certain countries, there will be a treaty that will come into picture where India has a double tax treaty with those countries. And if the treaty prescribes for a lower rate, then the benefit of the lower rate would be available to the NRI, to the non-resident individual. Now, India has kind of tax treaties with almost 80 plus countries, and every treaty deals with the taxation of capital gains and dividends in a particular manner. So depending on the respective tax treaties, the capital gain tax rate or the dividend tax rate would be looked at based on the treaty rate. And then the NRI has an option. If the rate as per the Indian Income Tax Act, as per the domestic law, is more favorable, he can opt for that. If as per the tax treaty it is more favorable, he can opt for that. And I have broadly kind of listed down few countries where generally where we see a lot of investments coming from, and the tax rates for capital gains as well as for dividend under these countries. By and large, if you see for capital gains, the treaty do not provide for a specific tax rate or the specific benefit under the tax treaty. Most of the treaties, right from Singapore, US, Hong Kong, UAE, UK, all of these tax treaties provide that if there is a capital gain that is arising to the non-resident, it will be taxed as per the Indian tax law. So there's no other benefit that comes under the tax treaty. Only a few countries, Netherlands, Korea are two examples. Another example is Kenya. These 2 or 3 tax treaties provide for a kind of a tax exemption if certain conditions are fulfilled. Like for example, the Netherlands tax treaty provides that if the transfer is to another non-resident, so a non-resident selling to another non-resident, then there is no tax. If the non-resident is making an exit and the buying party is an Indian company or an Indian investor, then if the shareholding is less than 10%, which would be the case in most of the cases in startup investments, again, there is no tax. But if the shareholding is more than 10%, then again, it is taxed as per the Indian Income Tax Act. Same way, Korea also provides that if the shareholding is less than 5%, then it is not taxable. If it's more than 5%, it is taxable as per the Indian Income Tax Act. And so these are the 2 major treaties that kind of provide for certain exemptions, mainly on capital gains. Otherwise, most of the tax treaties provide that the capital gain regime, which is applicable to an Indian investor, would equally apply to a non-resident investor. From a dividend taxation perspective, obviously, the taxation is much more beneficial to a non-resident as compared to a resident. As an individual Indian resident, your dividend income would be taxable on your own slab rate. So if you are in the highest tax bracket, then it will be between 30 to 40%, depending on the surcharge, etc. But as a non-resident, most of these tax treaties provide for a 5 to 10% tax on dividend income. So a non-resident earning dividend income from Indian companies, definitely there is a benefit for them if they have the tax treaty benefit. If they look at the tax treaty, they have the tax residency certificate to prove to the investee company that they are a tax resident of, say, US or Japan, the respective countries, then they can take the benefit of the. So this was a broad overview of the 2 major streams of income, the capital gains and the dividend income. Now what I have done is in the next few slides is kind of gone with certain kinds of investment models or kind of investment options that generally individuals have. So the first is a direct investment by an investor into a startup company, right? And how does the taxation would work on that, both for a resident Indian individual as well as for a non-resident Indian. So for a startup, direct investment to a startup, like I mentioned, the interest income and the dividend income would be taxable at their own tax rates, depending on their tax, the slab in which they are falling. If they are falling in the highest tax bracket, considering the highest surcharge, say, which is 5 crore and above, the interest income then would get taxed at 42%. And the dividend income would get taxed at almost 36%. Capital gains I already explained in the earlier slide, which is depending on whether it's long-term or short-term. For unlisted shares, long-term would be 20% plus the surcharge and cess, and short-term would be again at a normal tax rate depending on the slab in which they are falling. For a non-resident individual, like for the interest income or the dividend income, the tax rate as per the Indian Income Tax Act is 20%. But if you are, like I mentioned, if you are a resident of any of the country, and you have the benefit of the tax treaty, then it could be either between 10 to 15% for interest or 5 to 10% for the dividend. However, for capital gains, except for Netherlands and Korea that we saw, it would be kind of taxable based on what the Indian tax law is. So again, you go back to classifying your investments as either long-term or short-term, and accordingly pay the taxes that are there. So no preferential treatment available to non-resident individual on capital gains taxation unless they are from the specified countries. Now, what happens if I invest in the startup company through a company of my own, through a private limited company of my own, or through a LLP or partnership firm of my own? Now, in this case, there is two levels of taxation for a company. This is basically when the company is exiting the startup, they will have to pay capital gains. Again, for a company, the capital gains would be payable depending on the corporate tax rate, if it's a short-term asset, or a 20% tax rate if it's a long-term asset. After that, once you have the money in your own company, if you have to take it back in your own hands as an individual, if you want to bring it to your own hands, there's another level of taxation that would arise, which is either in the nature of which is either in the nature of dividend, or it will be in nature of the buyback tax, etc., where you take the money out from company back in your hands as an investor. However, in case of LLP or a partnership firm, once the LLP or partnership firm pays the taxes on capital gains, which is basically at the time of exit of the startup company, then that money can again come back to investor as an individual without any further tax. So the movement from the LLP or partnership firm back to investor, there is no taxation as such, no further tax as such. So from that perspective, the company structure is very inefficient from a tax perspective. In some sense, it results in double taxation, and therefore most people kind of avoid the company structure. However, investment through partnership firm or LLP are also not simple. While they may be attractive from a tax perspective, but from a regulatory perspective, there are challenges. Like in LLP, if the LLP is doing only purely financial or investing activities, then there are challenges in registering the LLP, incorporating the LLP itself with the registrar of companies, because they do not accept a company with the they do not accept an LLP with a main object of financial or investment activities. And if the income of LLP is by and large, the majority form of income or majority form of assets are in the nature of financial assets or investment assets, then it would be kind of regarded as an NBFC, and that is where the challenge comes in terms of registering or inquiries from the ROC with respect to the financial or investment activity. So while LLP mode is attractive from a tax perspective, regulatory there are challenges in investing through LLP. Same way, investing through a partnership firm is not recognized as a separate independent body from a legal perspective. So a partnership firm cannot be entered as a shareholder or a member in the records of the private limited company, which is your startup company. So generally what practically people do is that they put down the names of the partner who kind of represents the firm, and the name of the partner enters the shareholders register for the private limited company. This creates an issue nowadays, because now you have to start reporting your investments in the tax return, which again we are going to cover in the later part of the presentation. But with the company, you would have given a permanent account number of the partner, which the company would then kind of file with the tax authorities, etc. Whereas in your personal tax return, you will not show it because the money would have gone from the partnership firm. So even partnership firm route is not as simple, and there are challenges with respect to this. So if you look at the option of direct investments or investment through private limited company, LLP or partnership firm, amongst these three, a direct investment option is the most tax efficient, as well as is the most easier, flexible, and kind of without any regulatory hassles. That option is the best option to be incorporated. The other option which kind of has come up in the last few years is mainly on the alternative investment funds. AIFs. So now SEBI has allowed this under the category 1 AIF, Angel AIF fund, which is a subcategory venture capital fund under the category 1. Basically, an angel investor is allowed to make an investment in an AIF. The AIF is then further making investment into a startup company. the angel investor is issued the units of the AIF, which is how the entire mechanism works. Now, as an angel investor, you need to fulfill certain conditions. Only if you fulfill the conditions, would you be allowed as an individual or a body corporate to invest in the AIF. For an individual, the conditions are that he has to have a net tangible assets of at least 2 crores, which would exclude the value of his principal residence or at least one house where he is staying. Also, he has to be either an early stage, he has to have an early stage investment experience, or has an experience as a serial entrepreneur, or is a senior management professional with at least 10 years of experience. So if you comply with these conditions, which is having a net worth of 2 crores, excluding your principal residence, and with a senior management professional experience or early stage investment experience, then if you comply with this, you are eligible to make an investment into an AIF, and the AIF would then issue the units to you. If the investor is a body corporate, which is either an LLP or a company, then it has to have a net worth of at least 10 crores for the purpose of making the investments. The minimum investment size here is 25 lakhs over a 5-year period, and the maximum is 5 crores by an individual. And the AIF regulations do permit that NRIs can invest in the AIF. So NRIs are investments in AIFs are permitted as per the regulations from SEBI. Coming to taxation of the AIF, again, since the angel investment funds would fall under category 1 AIF, the taxation is very simple. The AIF is actually a pass-through entity. It is investing on your behalf. So AIF does not pay any taxes. And whatever is the income that is generated by AIF and passed on to you, you pay tax depending on the nature of income and depending on your tax rate. So if AIF is making an income in form of an exit, which is capital gains or loss, then it is passed on to investors also as capital gains. And as investors, individual investors, you will pay tax as capital gains, again, depending on whether it is a short term or long term. If it's short term, the full tax rate, which is your normal tax rate. If it's a long term, then it is 20% plus the applicable surcharge and cess. If the AIF is making interest income or dividend income and passing as such income or dividend income. So the nature of income does not change. The tax rate does not change purely because you are investing through an AIF. But there is no double level of taxation over here, and you can make an investment through AIF and suffer only one level of taxation in your hands. There is a TDS or a withholding tax to be done by AIF. For resident, it is 10%, and for non-resident, it is 10%, or if the tax treaty provides for a lower rate, it would be a lower rate. The AIF itself could be a form of either a company, trust, or an LLP, and depending on how the AIF is set up, if the income is other than the ones I mentioned above, which is interest, dividend, or capital gains, if there is a normal business income in the hands of AIF, which is very unlikely, but if there is such income, then it will be taxable in the hands of AIF, and the AIF will pay the tax depending on the way it is incorporated. So, but by and large, in most cases, we see that the AIF would earn income either in form of interest, dividend, or mainly capital gains for startup investments. So this is very, very broadly investments with respect to and the different investment models. If you look at investments, the Indian investments kind of going abroad and how Indians can invest abroad. Way back in 2003, we started with this liberalized remittance scheme where the government initially permitted up to $25,000 to be remitted abroad, and the dream of Indian company, Indian person owning Apple stock or kind of Microsoft stock, that was the whole idea with this, with the introduction of the liberalized remittance scheme or the LRS. Over the years, the limits have increased. The resident individuals can now invest up to $250,000 per financial year for the purpose of investment outside India. Now, the LRS scheme, when it kind of got announced and over the years when the limits increased, actually got really abused by a lot of individuals, and RBI then realized that they need to come down heavily because the purpose which with the LRS was introduced was not getting fulfilled, and people were using this money for different kinds of investment, which RBI never thought they would do that. So now they have kind of dissected the LRS part into two, where you are making a portfolio investment or you are making a direct investment in a company. And I'll broadly explain what this is. The portfolio investment part is not defined. They have defined what is an overseas direct investment. They have not defined what is a portfolio investment. But generally, it is understood that portfolio investment would be ideally in a listed company Or even if it's an unlisted company, it would be a small shareholding, maybe 2%, 1%, less than 5%, with no management rights, no board seat. So it's more like a passive investment that I'm doing in as a portfolio investor. So this portfolio investment can be still freely made without any restrictions, subject to the $250,000 ceiling that I mentioned. Income from this portfolio investment that comes, again, depending on the nature of income, if you earn dividend income or interest income, or if you earn capital gains, it will be taxable in your hands. Being residents, your global income is taxed, so there is no tax relief on such. The moment the income arises to you, you will have to pay tax on that. Making investments in this portfolio is always advisable to open a bank account outside India and then make investment through that account, so that tomorrow when you liquidate that investment, it can lie in the bank account outside India. You don't necessarily have to bring it back into India. So it's always advisable to have a bank account, and from that bank account, make an investment, say into Apple stock or a new startup in USA or a new startup in Singapore, wherever you want to be. As opposed to this, the overseas direct investment is actually an investment where you are investing in a company which is like a subsidiary or a joint venture outside India. So it's your own entity rather than a passive small investment. This is a full-fledged investment that you're doing. Here there are too many restrictions, because this was a model that RBI never contemplated would go under LRS. But at the same time, many businessmen have kind of used LRS to start businesses abroad, their own by way from subsidiary or by way of own joint venture, which is where RBI came very hard in 2013 and made a lot of restrictions in making these investments. So first restriction they have put down is that the overseas entity in which you are making the investment should be engaged in a bona fide business activity. So it can't be in a real estate business, it can't be in a banking business, it can't be in a business of financial services. So you have to be very clear. You cannot invest you cannot set up a fund outside India through the LRS route, or you cannot kind of do a real estate business which is buying and selling of property through the LRS route. The foreign entity again should be an operating entity, and it cannot have another layer of subsidiary. So foreign entity cannot have, say if you are investing in USA, the US entity cannot have another company in UK or Germany or anywhere else. It has to be one layer of investment only. It cannot be a further layer down. And the foreign entity cannot send that money back to India in some other form of investment. So round tripping of funds, that we generally understand that the money sent abroad comes back to India in some other form, that's also not there. There are valuation requirements, and there are a lot of compliances and documentation to be done post the investments, which is filing the share certificates, the annual performance reports, etc. That needs to be complied with. So while people are using the LRS limits to make direct investments abroad, it has to be with these additional conditions that are to be fulfilled. So these are the main aspects with respect to our overseas investment. Coming to the tax benefit, that as an investor, do you derive any tax benefit while making investment in startups? So there are broadly two sections that provide investments, capital gains relief if you are investing in a startup. First is section 54GB, which provides that if there's a capital gains that has arisen to you because of selling a long-term asset, being a residential house or a plot of land. So if you're having a residential house and you sell that, which was a long-term asset, then capital gains arising from such transaction, from such sale of house, can be invested in a startup. There are conditions for this. First is that the startup has to be a newly formed company. The startup has to use this money that you invest to buy certain eligible assets within 1 year from the date of subscription. And you have to hold 25% voting power, share capital in that startup company. So it's again not available for small kind of investments in the range of 1%, 2%. So basically this is for your own startup. If you want to do your own startup, then this is a place where you can use, and if you sell a house and then use that money to invest in your own startup, that is where you get the capital gains exemption. You don't pay capital gains on the sale of house. You have to invest the entire consideration, the net sale consideration that you receive. If you want a full exemption, if you invest part of that consideration, then the proportionate amount of capital gain exemption is available. And there is a 5-year lock-in period, both for the equity shares. So you cannot sell the equity shares for a period of 5 years. And the startup which has further used that money to buy the assets, they cannot dispose of the asset for another 5 years. And that 5-year condition is relaxed to 3 years if the asset is in the nature of computer or computer software. And what is an eligible company or what is an eligible startup here is which is the company which is recently incorporated, which is the company which is incorporated in the year in which the capital gain arises. It is engaged in business of manufacturing or including software development. It is a company which qualifies to be a small and mid-sized enterprise under the MSME Act, which is basically investment in equipment of not more than, if more than 25 lakhs, but less than 10 crores. And a new asset means that the startup can buy any plant and machinery, but not second-hand plant and machinery. So this is a very limited, with all the qualified kind of conditions, exemption available for people to invest in startup. I'm pretty sure that not many have utilized this because the conditions are very onerous and practically not possible. The other exemption is available. Is the other way around, that if you sell the shares of a startup or any other capital asset other than the residential house, and there's a capital gains on that, then you can invest in a house property. So if you invest in a startup and you make gains of the startup and you don't want to pay any tax further on the startup, then you can use that funds to make an investment in a residential house. The house can be purchased 1 year before or 2 years after the date of the transfer of shares, or you construct a new house within the 3 years from the date of transfer. But the most important condition is that as a taxpayer, you should not be already owning more than one residential house. So one house is allowed, the other house can be purchased through this exemption under section 54F. But if you already have two houses, then this section is not applicable and you don't get any benefits. Similarly, if you have one house, you purchase one more house under this 54F, and you buy another house after 1 year, then also the exemption gets withdrawn. Or the house that you bought under this 54F, if you sell it within 3 years, then also the exemption gets withdrawn. So again, a lot of conditions are attached because essentially everywhere government wants to ensure that the benefit is being given to the right kind of people and not everyone taking the benefit where it is not intended. By selling residential property, making investment in shares in a startup company. Second is by selling the startup shares, making investment in a residential property. We'll come to some other aspect, which is basically disclosures in the tax returns, etc. How is there? So basically, if you're investing in unlisted shares directly, not through a partnership firm, not through a LLP, then you have to file an ITR 2. Obviously, if you have income, which is income in the nature of salary, capital gains, other sources, etc., and you don't do any business as such. If you are investing in a startup through a LLP, so you are a partner in LLP and that LLP is making investments into the startup, then you have to use the form ITR 3 to file your tax returns. Under ITR 2, this particular clause L is there, where you need to disclose your investment into unlisted equity shares, not listed, unlisted equity shares, where a number of details like the name of the company, the permanent account number of company, what was the number of shares that you acquired, what was the face value of the shares, what was the issue price of the shares, etc. All that has to be disclosed. But again, this is with respect to equity shares. So if you are holding preference shares, this clause does not applicable and there is no disclosure as such currently required under any tax return for holding preference shares. So if you are holding equity shares, this is the disclosure that is required. The other aspect that comes is that valuation from a tax perspective. Whether there are any kind of valuation requirement from a tax perspective, there are rules under the income tax law. But as an investor, you just have to ensure that your entry price or exit price for equity shares is higher than the adjusted book value. And in most startup cases, it is bound to be. If it's higher than the adjusted book value, either the entry price or the exit price, then there is no further tax implication. As an investor, you don't have to be worried about it. For preferences, you just have to support it by way of a valuation certificate. There are no norms that are being prescribed for that purposes. So as long as it is supported by the valuation certificate, it would be acceptable to the tax authorities. So this was a very broad kind of overview in terms of how the taxation process would work for an individual investor. Happy to take on questions right now. There are a few things under in the annexures which broadly talks about the the tax rates and use slab-wise tax rates, etc., or the forms of investments. But we can go into that depending on what kind of questions that are now coming on.
Amazing, Maulik. I think this annexures anyway will circulate to the investors with your due permission. If you're okay to circulate the presentation, then this will go with them and they can study this. But very, very sharp presentation, must say. I think a lot of myths busted, a lot of doubts clarified, and some great understanding of very typical usual questions that we get, especially from our NRI investors, right? I think very well covered, Maulik. Thanks for this. 300 attendees on the call and not a single soul has moved. That speaks about the quality of the presentation and the areas that we have covered. I now have a tough task of curating 50 plus questions for you. So let me make most of the time and read some of the general questions for you. Investors will try and move away from specific individual questions, as the idea is to cover topics pertaining to general importance rather than taking specific questions. So I'll take my first question from Manoj. I've been holding unlisted shares for less than 12 months. Now the shares gets listed. He's referring to Zomato, by the way. What would the tax treatment be in such case?
So that the shares are now got listed. As and when you share the listed shares, from the date of sale and the date of purchase, you kind of look at the counting period. So when you are selling the shares, they are listed shares. And as long as you hold for more than 12 months, it will be long term. If it's less than 12 months, it will be short term.
Thank you, Maulik. One question which is from one of our panelists is, what is the TDS rate on sale of shares by NRIs? Is there some clarity around, does that differ from country to country, or there is a standard TDS rate?
There is no standard TDS rate. It differs from country to country, differs from what kind of capital gains that an NRI has. So for example, if there is a capital loss, then there is no question of TDS. Typically what happens is the NRI generally approaches a tax officer for determining the right withholding tax rate, and that withholding tax certificate is then given to the purchaser for him to deduct the taxes.
Okay. Typically in our case, I think even the acquirers ask for a CA certificate or accountant certificate. And based on that, they treat this short-term gain or long-term gain as the only income and deduct the withholding tax. Is that the right way to look at it?
Yes, that's how practically happens. But in case of larger investments or especially where private equity investors etc. are involved, they generally insist on a similar certificate, but from the tax office rather than a chartered accountant.
Makes a lot of sense. Question from Vasant. I made some investment in US company as founders, but that venture has closed down. Can I adjust this as long-term capital loss by adjusting gain on the capital gain in the Indian companies?
So the thing around the investments getting failed or kind of writing off investments, if the company is actually wound down, the company has gone through the closure process and the company ceases to exist, then you can claim that as a long-term capital asset. But the company is still lying shell, it has not taken any process for doing any of this thing, then you technically still hold the shares. There is no transfer or extinguishment of shares, and therefore you cannot claim this as a loss.
So Maulik, I think the wiser thing to do in this case is maybe just to show a sale transaction to somebody else at the lowest way possible of the loss.
Absolutely. Then you just sell it to your wife or a relative at the lowest possible value, and then you claim the loss in that. So that's the practical way out.
Great. We are learning, Maulik. Thanks for your help.
Would be difficult if the investee company is a US startup, because then you have to go through the FEMA, RBI regulations, and for example, your wife would not be able to purchase from you shares of the non-resident company, because that's an Indian rupee transaction, whereas the company involved is a foreign company. So your advice holds for local companies. For domestic companies, no issues.
As long as we are able to do an arm's length transaction, then I think it's fine.
Absolutely.
Thanks. Question by Krishna. Can you please clarify what's the cutoff date for declaring investments in ITR at the time of investment?
The cutoff date is the filing of the tax return. So this ITR is the tax return form, and when you file your tax return, this information has to be included. So if you ignore the pandemic and the COVID-19 relaxations, for individuals, it is 31st July of the every year.
Got it. Question by Guru. Section 54F for unlisted shares applicable on short-term gains as well? Or are there any other? Only on long-term capital gain. Are there any other sections?
Short-term, there are Short term, there are no exemptions available by making reinvestments.
Okay. Question by Sujit. If we make a profit of 50 lakh on investment of 1 crore of investment in startup, then for tax benefit by purchasing the residential property within 2 years of selling the shares of the startup, then should the capital gain be kept in a capital gain bank account within 6 months of selling the shares?
Only if you are not able to kind of make an investment within the due date of filing or tax return, then you put it in your capital gain account. But you need to buy a house property within 1 year, within 2 years from the date of sale. Till that time, you can park it in your capital gain account.
Okay, awesome. So if it is before the due date of filing of return, you can keep it like any other normal money which you normally hold. But if it is at the time of due date of return, better off parking it in a capital gain bank. Thanks, Mohan.
Absolutely.
Question by Guru again. Can I get capital gain exemption arising from sale of unlisted shares against losses in listed shares? I think this will be one question which will be on everybody's mind. So a transaction which is involving STT, the capital loss on that, can it be set off against gain on
Yes,
the...
after April 2018, it is permitted because now your listed shares are also taxable.
Got it. And question from international NRI perspective. Can I get capital gain exemption arising from sale of foreign unlisted shares against losses in listed shares? Did I explain the question correctly, Maulik?
No. Yeah. You need to set off capital gains arising from Indian shares only, be it listed or unlisted. You cannot set off capital gains arising or capital loss arising from foreign shares with the Indian shares.
Got it.
This is for NRI, right?
For NRI
perspective. Yeah. For an Indian resident, you can set off anything, but for an NRI, foreign shares cannot be set off against Indian shares.
Got it. Next one is by Rajiv Parikh. I'm not supposed to declare CCPS of startup while filing ITR. Am I correct? No, Rajiv, you have to declare CCPS investment of startup also as part of all the unlisted investment while filing ITR. Am I correct, Maulik?
No. You have to declare in your tax return, but not in the ITR form, because ITR form only talks about the equity shares.
Oh yeah, makes sense. Question by Muthurasupuram Ganeshan. If we invest in CCPS, how do we show in return? Thought you said only equity share needs to be shown in ITR towards it. So question in similar breadth.
Yeah, so the ITR requires only declaration in form of equity shares. You don't need to really show CCPS in that column, but obviously since you made investments through your bank account, you will prepare your balance sheet, etc. It will be reflected there.
Got it. Question by Vasant and the same question by Akul as well. While filing income tax return, do we need to declare all the investment including through LLP for the year? So probably they're referring to where the money has been pulled into an LLP and the LLP has made an investment. Then this investment into LLP.
So you have to disclose only your investment into LLP, not the second part, because LLP is a separate body corporate from an income tax perspective. And therefore LLP, when it files tax returns, would disclose the investment further down in the startup.
And will the answer change if it is through AIF? So investors who are putting in money in an AIF for a particular startup scheme, for them, how will the disclosure be?
You have to disclose units of the AIF, nothing further.
Got it. Question by Nitin. Nitin, first of all, wants to commend your experience of 19 years in cross-border transactions. And he wants you to cover capital gain taxes for NRI at the time of disposal of investment in startup company. Nitin, I guess Maulik has covered it in fair detail in his presentation. We'll be sharing the presentation as well as the recording also. But if you have any specific question, then please put it on the Q&A window. Question by Gopal, is LLP vehicle allowed for investment in startups? I thought with some new guidelines under SEBI, there is a question mark on this. I think Maulik already covered it, but makes sense to re-emphasize.
Yeah, I covered that. Absolutely. So there is an issue because if the LLP is doing only investment activity or financial activities, the ROC would not register the LLP itself. So at the start only, we'll kind of not be able to proceed further.
Great, thanks. Question by Smita, would you need an investment banker to set up in AIF? Smita, I can take that. at IPB, we already set up an AIF. You don't need an investment banker, but obviously you need to comply with a lot of legal formalities and procedure and all. So you need a lawyer to actually do that, and a good amount of experience of investing into startups. That's a mandatory requirement. Minimum 5 years of experience of investing, any form of investment. That's a mandatory requirement. Question by Sujit: what is TDS applicable for NRI? Sujit, I think that's already been answered and it's already part of the annexure and presentation. We'll share with you. Dinesh Modi: what's the tax rate for transactions in foreign listed companies? NYSE specifically. I think that will be interesting. A lot of investors actually nowadays in India are investing in foreign companies, NYSE listed companies and all. Any different tax treatment for them?
No different tax treatment. In fact, it would be taxed as long term or short term, again 20% or 30%. No preferential tax rate of 10% for foreign listed securities.
Oh, got it. So unlike Indian listed securities, for foreign listed securities, they'll be at par with listed securities.
They are at par with other assets.
Got it. Okay. Thanks. That's a great clarification. Hemant, would the recent Bangalore tribunal judgment about carrying cost have any implications for IPB? Hemant, we are looking at that judgment. No, not as of now. Because the judgment is probably going to be challenged. It's a very hard judgment in the opinion of a lot of lawyers, where they are trying to tax the trust or the carry or for the gains, which is not the intent. Anyway, in case of IPB, there is no carry being charged to investors. This is anyway redundant for us. But in general, from AIF perspective also, this will not have any immediate implications. Question by Abhilash: what's the tax rate for proprietorship companies? Abhilash, tax rate for proprietorship companies is same as individual. Because is represented by the individual itself. Question by Rakshit around enhanced surcharge for unlisted shares LTCG. Have you covered? Is there part of the table, Maulik?
Yeah, it's a part of this. These are the surcharge rates. Is there on the screen. For individuals with gains of more than 50 lakhs to 1 crore, it is 10%. And if gain is more than 1 crore, it is 15%.
Thank you. Question by Gopal: I want to gift a part of my holding to my resident daughter. Gopal, I don't get the question correct. Are you asking that whether this gift will be taxable or not? I'll take that as a question. Maulik, if there is a gift, then?
Yeah, so the gift would not be taxable if it's to a relative, which is her daughter. And it is permissible from a law perspective also.
Okay, actually, there is a continuation of this question here. Sorry, it's after one question in between. So will the period for short term or long term for his daughter begin from the date of Gopal's investment or daughter's transfer to the daughter?
It would be begin from Gopal's investment.
Okay, awesome.
So you get the benefit of the...
Great. Question by Arun: if my long-term capital gain on listed share is say 75,000 rupee and long-term capital gain on unlisted share is say 2 lakh rupee, do I still have the exemption on LTCG for listed shares?
Yes.
Okay.
To 1 lakh rupees, that exemption is available.
Okay, awesome. Question by Ankur: at the time of an exit, is the TDS calculated based on the respective tax slabs or the highest rate applicable followed by refund at the time of tax filing?
So there is no TDS if the investor is a individual Indian resident on capital gains. So he only have to pay by way advance taxes. There will be no TDS.
So just one addition to that, Ankur, there will be a TDS of 10% if in case you have invested through AIF. So AIF will deduct 10%.
AIF, absolutely.
Otherwise, like Maulik said, individually there will be no TDS. You have to calculate your liability by way of self-assessment or paid advance tax. Question by Vasant: if someone has to open an organization, would you recommend private limited or LLP in terms of compliance? I think it's a great question. Maybe you can again just give an overall perspective in terms of which is the best vehicle for investment.
From a tax perspective, LLP would be better. But like I mentioned earlier, LLP is very difficult to incorporate if the only activity is going to be investment of financial activity. If you're going to do a business in LLP and you kind of invest in few shares, that's perfectly fine.
Great, awesome.
The company is tax inefficient.
Got it. Question by Siddharth: would a partnership firm investing through an AIF solve the issue with reporting individual PAN?
I think there is a partnership firm would not be allowed to invest in an AIF is the thought process. 1 second.
No, partnership firm can invest into AIF, but yeah, the 10 crore amount and all the partners have to qualify for the net worth criteria.
Yeah, I think all the partners have to meet the criteria individually. I don't think there is a partnership 10 crore criteria.
Yeah, all the partners will have to meet the criteria of investing through AIF. Cool. Gaurav has a question. Can you clarify about investment through a private trust?
So again, a private trust can be a shareholder in a company, and the kind of whatever income the trust would generate through the startup company, it is at the discretion of the trustee to distribute that. If it's a private discretionary trust, the trust does not pay any taxes, and ultimately the trust would pay the taxes that is applicable, and the beneficiary would receive the income tax-free, and they would not have to pay taxes.
Awesome. Question by J. Subramaniam, I'll take it. Recent SEBI amendment requires AIF also to engage investment banker due to quality relating to PPM issues. Please give your views, sir. So Subramaniam sir, this is basically a proposal. It's not yet been passed. This will be deliberated and then probably this will convert into a notification or a law. Till then, the current practice remains. Question by Krishna, when units of AIF are redeemed at the time of exit, is it income or capital gain?
Capital gains.
So Krishna, units of AIF are equivalent to your share in the startup. So when AIF actually sells the shares, your unit gets redeemed back to back, and that's when it triggers capital gain. Like Maulik said, the AIF is nothing actually but a pass-through. Question by Neeraj, can you please explain how the investment will be used through partnership? Partnership will transfer the funds to the investing company and one of the partner will be the nominee shareholder for the partnership. Very interesting question, Maulik. And what will be the tax?
The partnership would transfer the funds to the startup company. The partner's name would enter as a nominee shareholder, nominee on behalf of the partnership firm. The actual beneficial owner is the partnership firm, and the taxability, the reporting, the accounting, all would be done by the partnership firm. The partner is more as a placeholder being added in the shareholders register or members register in case of private limited company.
Cool. Resident OCI is categorized as NRI or resident Indian from the startup investment point of view. Currently, I am filing my tax returns in India. Question by Venkateswara.
If you are resident in India, the tax residency is nothing to do with OCI or your status in terms of PIO, etc. It purely depends on the number of days of stay in India. If you stay in India for more than 183 days, you are a resident Indian, and accordingly, the resident taxation would apply.
Great. Question by Nikhil Agrawal. Can a resident Indian with no setup or PR or citizenship outside India open a bank account outside India? I don't think this is a tax related question, but Maulik, in case you
yeah,
like
so a resident Indian can open a bank account outside India. I didn't get the first part.
Basically, he's saying that even if he doesn't have a PR or resident or any citizenship outside India, just being a normal Indian resident, can you open a bank account outside
Absolutely.
India?
You can. And you can transfer $250,000 every year.
Oh, okay. Under LRS, then it will be allowed. Okay. Dinesh Singh, I sold shares in my startup in May 2020. How should I save my long-term capital gain tax? I think Dinesh, that's the entire section 54 around exemption through various routes for long-term capital gain tax, either by investment in another residential property or investment in bonds or investing in your own startup where you are holding more than 50%. I think Maulik has already covered in his presentation. You'll be able to refer to it when we share the presentation. Question by Sahil. How is the net worth for AIF computed in case of HUF? Whether it is the net worth of HUF, Karta, individual or combination thereof. Sahil, it's the net worth of the HUF itself. That's computed at the time of calculation of AIF. No, sorry. This is for the purpose of AIF if you are asking. Then it will be the net worth of all the members of the HUF. It will be Karta and all the other members of the HUF. Based on that, the net worth will be calculated. Ankur, correct?
Sorry, Mitesh, what's the question?
If it is an HUF investing in AIF, the net worth
the Karta needs to have the criteria met.
Okay, it will be the Karta who will need to have the criteria met.
Yeah.
Maulik, question by Nero. There is another section 54EE if I am not wrong. Any idea around 54EE?
So that is with respect to investments in specified bonds, but that is had a sunset of 1st April 2019. So no longer applicable now.
Got it. Question by Sumit. For gains on ESOP exercised at a liquidity event, can section 54F benefits be applied? Sumit, I believe when you exercise ESOP, if you have converted the shares and it's a long-term capital gain, then obviously 54F benefit can be applied. But short-term gain or ESOPs itself have been liquidated and there is a income as salary, then 54F cannot be applied. Question by Anup. If you have investment in unlisted shares in LLP, then is it ITR 3?
If you're unlisted, yes, it is ITR 3. The moment LLP comes into picture, it is ITR 3.
Okay. Gopal, for CCPS, we do not have to declare it in the ITR.
Yes, specifically in the ITR form, no. But in your tax returns overall, while filing your tax return, while preparing the balance sheet, yes.
Okay. I think that covers, Sanjay, your question as well. Sanjay's question was, can we voluntarily disclose CCPS and CCD in ITR form? So I think you can cover it in the balance sheet disclosure as Maulik just said. Question by Shiv Thakral, do NRIs have to file ITR too?
NRIs, yes, the same forms are applicable to NRIs. There is no separate forms for NRIs. So if the whole unlisted shares in Indian companies, they have to file ITR too.
Got it. Pradyumna has a very interesting question. What does adjusted book value mean for entry or exit price?
It is basically a formula prescribed under the law, which is very close to the book value of the company. The Rule 11 UA valuation is kind of commonly called. So from the book value of the company, there are certain adjustments from a tax perspective that you do, but it comes to very close to the book value of the company.
Thank you. Just a quick time check, Ruchi and Sandhya, how much time more we have? And Maulik, request to you as well, if we can extend it by 5-10 minutes more, since there are some other questions also that audience would like to cover.
I am comfortable.
Ruchi, Sandhya, are we fine to extend it by 5-10 minutes?
Absolutely, absolutely. If Maulik and you are okay, thank you so much. It would be fine.
Thanks, Ruchi. Avinash would like to compliment you, Maulik. Very informative session. Thanks to you. Could you quickly touch on taxation with respect to advisory shares and ESOPs?
Okay, advisory shares. I'm not sure if there's a class of that shares, but basically, if from a law perspective, they are either classified as unlisted or listed shares. ESOPs would once they convert into shares, once you exercise the ESOP and you get shares of the company, if they are unlisted, again it will follow the same methods as unlisted. So more than 24 months, it will be taxable as long term, and less than 24 months as short term. And if they're listed, then the period of holding can come down to 12 months.
Perfect. So Avinash, for ESOPs, the point of taxation is actually exercise of shares and not vesting of shares. The moment you exercise, from that point of time, your period of calculation for short term or long term will start. And advisory shares, like Maulik rightly put it, if these are shares issued today as equity shares or CCPS, accordingly your taxation will change. Atul Gupta, to what extent IPV helps in providing information needed in the annexure and ITR2? Oh, sure, Atul. I think we have all the information on our app. You go to a particular startup section, it will have all the information, including the PAN number, the date of your investment, the other details of your holding. So it's self-explanatory. I'm not sure if you are already on the app or you tried the app, but all the details which are required to be furnished for your IT returns, it's already covered there. Jigar Shah, if an Indian private limited company becomes 100% partner in LLC company incorporated in US, then what will be the taxation treatment in the hands of Indian private company?
Depending on the nature of income that the Indian private limited company is getting, if the LLC distributes dividend, then it will be taxed as dividend in the hands of the Indian company. Any other income, it is taxable in the hands of Indian company at the normal corporate tax rate.
Great, thanks. Question by Vinod Bansal sir, if CCPS convertible into equity share 1:1, which is the normal ratio, is issued at a valuation higher than book value or face value, can equity shares be issued at book value or face value at the same time? So basically, in terms of
Yes,
different pricing.
I don't see an issue in that. And there is no tax implication as long as it is done at a book value or higher than that.
Okay, great. Question by Kaushik: is there a possibility of capital gain loss in case of startup? Yes, Kaushik. If let's say a startup is either winding up and liquidation is happening at less than the principal value, or if a startup has shut down, there is a possibility of booking a capital gain loss by transferring the shares at a nominal value, like 1 rupee 10 paisa, and booking the loss so that you can at least adjust that loss against some of the gains of other startups or any other short-term capital gain for that matter on other assets. Question by Kevin: if Indian unlisted company is under the process for being struck off, would that count and qualify for long-term capital loss, or do we need to wait for it to wind it up completely?
So strike off procedure is similar to wind off procedure. The once it gets struck off and the ROC recognizes that it is struck off, then it is same as a kind of wind down, and therefore you can claim the long-term capital loss.
Great. Question by Aparna: if a listed company is investing in startup through cash infused in the startup and equity shares of listed company as compensation to the founder, what are the tax implications for both?
So when the equity shares of are issued to the startups, the fair market value of those equity shares that are issued to the startups would be taxable in the hands of the founders as if they are transferring the shares. So the normal capital gains taxation would derive, and the fair market will be taken as a sales consideration.
Great, thanks. Question by Joseph: for unlisted shares, if there is no indexation taken, is there any provision for any lower taxation rate?
For unlisted shares, not for Indian residents, only for non-residents.
Okay, got it. Joseph, I believe your question was in context of domestic investors. So, as Maulik answered, no relaxation. Another question, interesting one: is there anything that investors need to keep in mind relating to wealth tax?
As of now, the shares and securities outside the wealth tax ambit, so no issues.
Okay.
You don't pay wealth tax, right, Mitesh?
Let's discuss offline. Aditya, question by Aditya Heda: resident having shares of an unlisted foreign company, where the capital gain will be taxable on sale of such shares.
Again, long term or short term, it's an unlisted equity foreign company. So depending on its long term or short term, the rates would be there. So long term 20% plus short term the normal individual tax rates.
Great. Interesting question by Manish Dafriya: for Section 54GB exemption, the investee company has to be engaged in manufacturing activity only, or it may be engaged in any other business?
It is manufacturing activity which includes software development as a part of it.
All right. Okay. Okay. Question by our very own Swarna: capital gains account scheme generally has a lock-in for 5 years, but can they be withdrawn and invested in property within the timeline of 6 months, as we just said, for temporary parking or funding?
Yes. Yes, it can be. The capital. This is a temporary parking into a capital gains exemption scheme, so savings account, which then can be used for the purchase of property.
Great. Maulik, as questions keep pouring on, I know we'll have to end somewhere, so maybe I'll take. It's already 3:40. Don't want to hold you for too long. I'll take maybe last 3 questions. Yeah, one interesting question by Nilima. I think that will be of general importance. Can you throw some light on angel tax? Do we need to check if the startups we invest in qualify the criteria for exemption?
So again, so angel tax is basically a name which is given with respect to the action of the tax officer in taxing the startup community. Angel tax is basically on investee company. It has nothing to do with investor. So it's an investee company. If the face value or the book value of the shares is 10 rupees and issues the shares at say 100 rupees at a substantial premium, the investee company had to justify it to the tax officer. And if they fail to do that, the tax officer will tax the differential, which is called as the angel tax. So as an investor, you don't have to really be worried about whether the investee company is kind of fulfilling the criteria or not, because it is for the investee company to deal with it. Obviously, from a good governance perspective, you always want to know that whether they are complying with all the conditions or not. But as such, it has no direct impact on you.
Awesome. Question by Srinivas Kutta. I just want to confirm on withholding tax of 5% above $7,500 even if I'm transferring via LRS to outside India bank account.
So this is made on the tax collected at source, TCS, that was introduced in 2020. Is actually a tax being additional amount of tax that you pay when you're sending the money of LRS above, I think 7 lakh rupees is the limit, if I'm not correct.
Yeah, I think it's $10,000. If my memory serves me right, I think it's $10,000, about 7.5 lakh. You're right. Okay, I've been told we have time till 3:45. So Maulik, I'll be greedy enough and take a few more questions if you're okay.
Sure, absolutely.
Question by Madhur, again relevant to IPB investment. Taxability of investment through safe instrument.
Again, safe instruments would not be classified as equity shares or shares of securities. So it will be considered as other assets. In other assets, if you hold for more than 3 years or more than 36 months, it will be regarded as a long term, and the long term rate would be 20% plus.
Awesome. Before I take further question, just a quick reminder to our investors and other attendees on call. Here's the offer for you to become IPB member and take advantage of many such enlightening sessions, right? So we have an offer for 20% discount today for an annual membership fee, as well as you can take a trial membership for 1 month and try out our founder calls as well as investor calls, and obviously you'll see the value in terms of the collective effort that we put in, where we try and get the best opportunities for startup investment to you, and in fact it's great, a lot of knowledge sharing as well. Next question by Krishna. If the foreign tax authority withholds tax for my ESOP sale, can I claim 54F benefit and claim refund in India?
54F benefit is available only with respect to certain long-term capital assets. Yes, you can, I think. So that portion would be available and you can claim a refund on that.
Okay, awesome. Question by Praveen. A private limited company can convert CCPS into equity if the conversion ratio already decided at the time of CCPS. Yes, Praveen, typically the way we build CCPS route or CCPS medium for investment is CCPS are convertible into equity 1:1 at the option of the investor whenever the investor wants to do it, or at the time period of 20 years. Now, any of these three, typically it converts at 1 CCPS equal to 1 equity shares, unless if there is an anti-dilution that we need to invoke where the conversion might be higher than Question by Nitin Patni. What are the RBI's compliances for investment made by NRIs in non-listed shares in India? Whether one-time compliance
nothing by the individual. It is up to the investee company to file those FCTRS forms, etc.
Yeah, so great, Nitin. It is basically where there are certain details that the investor needs to furnish, and that again depends on the repatriability of the investment that you want to drive. So if you have invested through overseas account and NRE account, then FCGPR needs to be filed, and for that certain details might be required from your overseas banker, right? But if it is meant to be a non-repatriable investment and you give a non-repatriable declaration, then you can take the money back into your NRO account and it will be treated like any other domestic investment. No RBI filing required per se by the investor. We'll take last couple of questions. I'm a salaried individual invested in CCPS last year. Normally, I don't prepare balance sheet, etc. Is it mandatory to prepare balance sheet in this case and attach with IPR2?
No, if the income is less than 50 lakhs, you are not mandated to prepare balance sheet.
Great, thanks. Question by Raju. Is the period of holding unlisted share counted from the date CCPS converts to equity share or from the date of investment?
From the date of investment of CCPS.
That's great. We have covered a few times. Question by Rajiv, a general question. Which is better, to invest in startup through HUF or to invest directly as an individual?
Individual simpler, easier, unless you have a tax benefit and you want to split your investments into HUF and individual to split your overall taxable base. That's a different thing. But otherwise, individual is simpler, easier. And HUF, you don't know when the government suddenly comes and says that this form of kind of entity is no longer possible.
Absolutely, and I think just to kind of belabor a little bit more on that, Maulik, I think the obvious advantage is where you get the basic exemption limit of that 5 lakh, 10 lakh, or lower tax slab limit, and that's the obvious advantage that people try to explore through investment in HUF. But you think this mode of investment or HUF as a structure also is viable, and government will clamp down on that some point of time?
Yes, I strongly believe that the government will clamp down sooner than later on this mode. There are a lot of discussions, a lot of newspaper articles that keep on popping every 3 months, every 6 months on this. So kind of generally, I would kind of now tend to advise against investing through HUF. I know that there's obviously some tax advantage to it, but if the amounts are not material, we should avoid it.
Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. Thanks. Okay, we'll take this last question. Question by Vasant. If investing through AIF in my name in wife's name, do we need to transfer money from wife's account to my account for every investment, or quarterly we can transfer? Vasant, advisable to make it a practice to do it investment wise, but I think you're better off consulting your chartered accountant and follow a normal practice over here. But idea is that it should be reflected just to make sure that even at the end of financial year it's completely aligned and all. Better to kind of do it investment to investment, and that's kind of going to help you in terms of maintaining the discipline as well. We'll take this last question by Jigar Vyas, Maulik. Is there any exemption for income from salary or business profession if the same is invested into startups just like companies?
No, salary people will have to pay tax. There is no option.
There can be a huge startup boom, even bigger than the current one going on, if this sort of exemption is. Jigar, I really wish your question goes to the ministry and they allow this. That's going to really empower a lot of funds and platforms like us. Yeah, but let it be a wishful thinking till then. Awesome, great, Maulik. I think time is our nemesis. I would wish this for continue. There are still loads of questions. Maybe investors can send it offline. And Maulik, thanks for a very fantastic presentation. I think it solved a lot of doubt that our investors had. Like I said at the beginning of the session, this was pending for long, and we needed something like this to clarify a lot of issues or concerns that investors had around tax filing and the normal taxation provision. So thanks for being there. Thanks for being there for us and clarifying these doubts. As discussed, I hope you're okay for investors to have this presentation and for IPB to share it with our.
I'm perfectly fine, and thank you for the opportunity, and really pleasure being a part of this.
Thank you so much, Maulik. It was our pleasure to have you over here. Investors, thanks for joining us on this call. As I said, there are opportunities for you to join IPB and take advantage of many more such sessions. Either you can take advantage of 20% discount prevailing today, offered only for today, or be a trial member for 1 month and experience the quality of the process and investment process over here for that 1 month. With this, thank you again, Maulik. Really interesting session, and I'm sure investors also loved it. We'll be back with many more such sessions, guys. Thank you so much for your presence on the call. Thanks, Maulik. Thanks again. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Have a great weekend ahead. Thanks.
Thanks, Maulik. Thanks, Pritesh.
Thanks, Ankur.